Dear colleagues, we come to order session number 2 for the keynotes, the second session on the keynotes. This afternoon, we are having two distinguished lecturers for the keynote addresses. I would like to introduce the first keynote address by Professor Ihsan Dogromaji, President and Chairman of the Board of Trustees at Bilkent University. The title of his address will be Changes in the Educational Landscape of Turkey, the Last 25 Years. The CV of Professor Dogromaji has been distributed to you. You will find it in your file. He is very well known to every one of you. I don't want to spend time on reading it again to you, because I'm sure you have read it. Very impressive CV. A great contribution to Turkey and to higher education, to the profession of medicine, particularly pediatrics. Professor Dogromaji is a highly distinguished person. We are very honored to have this address by him to us this afternoon.
Thank you for your kind introduction. In the year 1933, at that time, 10 years had passed since establishment of Turkish Republic, and reforms in many areas had taken place, but not very much in the areas of education or higher education. Atatürk encouraged academics to do something about it, but the results were not promising. So he decided to invite an expert from Switzerland, Professor Marsh, was asked to study this situation and propose certain reforms in higher education. Until then, universities used to rule themselves. Everything depended on the will of the senior academics. Well, Professor Marsh proposed a new law where the universities would be responsible to government, to Minister of Education, in many areas. But during those years, something else happened. A good number of distinguished academics, professors had left Europe, especially Germany, fleeing Nazi regime. So Turkey very wisely took advantage of them. And in those years, I was a medical student. The large number of our teachers were very distinguished German professors. In 1946, something else happened. There, Turkey's democracy changed. Multi-party system came into being, and the most important item on the agenda of every political party was freedom, democracy, and the turn had come to universities. They had to be governed by a democratic system. Professors would elect their deans for a certain period, and Although during that period, we had a good number of distinguished Turkish scientists, internationally known. But in general, things were not going the way they were expected to be. For example, the great number of the professors, senior professors, were using part or most of their time outside university in private practice, especially professors of medicine and law. The salaries were not adequate, so in a way, they probably had to do something about it by accepting second positions outside or private practice. And also, universities their promotion happened in their own universities. For example, in Istanbul, in the School of Law, professors of criminal law and civil law were about 60, and there was even one professor of law in several recently established universities. There was no way to tell them, please do something, because they were very free and that was very democratic. So things lagged behind. And in 1981, at that time, by the way, probably many of you know that my background is medicine and pediatrics, and I had been elected on the top position of International Pediatric Association for many years, and I had left my pediatrics. So I gladly accepted a teaching position in Paris to go back to my profession. And I was in Paris University since 1976. It was 1981 when I was invited by Turkish government whether I could suggest a new law. So I had to study the situation in many countries. And in the meantime, I also want to tell you that the time when I was serving as rector of Ankara University, I also became a member of the executive board or bureau of European Conference of Rectors. And then I had a chance to see the system in many European countries. And my dear friend Ignaz Benner had told me in his university, for example, there is in Trier, a group of 11 people made of those elected by students, by assistants, by professors, and by those in administration. They would propose who should be the rector, and I think then it would the government to decide. Am I right, Ignas? Something similar, quite different. And one thing also attracted my attention. I was visiting Vienna University. My colleagues, pediatricians, told me, it happened that that evening I was invited to Minister of Education of Austria, and my pediatric pediatricians colleagues in Vienna University told me, please tell the minister, it's already 4 months we have proposed 3 names for professorship to the minister, and she has not done anything. And they proposed a name. Will you tell her that this is the right person? I said, I cannot mix myself in your internal affairs, but I see. So a minute came, I asked the lady, I said, Professor Asperger, who died 4 months ago, who replaced him? And she said, don't ask me, brother, because they proposed 3 candidates, all of them, none of them is a social democrat, so I will not appoint any until they call back the names and propose social democrats. This is a true story that could have never happened in those days in Turkey. So at least it gave me a lesson, whether it's good or bad. It's better to have an authority to which you respond to, could ask you questions, than having no outside authority to ask you questions. I mean, that was the lesson for me. Of course, such a thing could never happen. Also, another interesting event that taught me a lesson, as European Rectors Conference, we used to meet in certain places, and the time had come that we were going to meet in London. And many of the European rectors were waiting for their flight from Paris to London and at the airport. It happened that there was an announcement for the representative of French university. He was being called, and he went and returned and said, sorry, I cannot come because chef de cabinet of the minister said the minister has not been allowed to leave the country. I mean, these things were indeed lessons for me. And when I was asked to propose a law, I studied the situations in different countries, and what attracted me, the situation in the United States, where the system of board of trustees apply. The boards of trustees, in a way, appoint the president of the university or the chancellor and protect autonomy of the university vis-à-vis outside, but also ask questions. What's happening and what's not happening? Most universities have one board of trustees, but in the United States, I discovered that in the state of New York or state of California, a board of trustees governs 20 universities. And that was another lesson. So I thought we could draft a new board of trustees, and we call it Council of Higher Education. We didn't want to leave the academics all the way out. 1/3 of membership of the council would be elected from universities, 1/3 appointed by government, but in each time the proposed candidates would be appointed by head of state. And 1/3 head of state would personally and directly appoint them. So that would be the board. And again, the president of the republic would appoint a president of this Council of Higher Education. It wouldn't go through government, but he would do that directly himself. So this law went into effect beginning in 1981. In those days, private universities were many private universities, but they used to be called institutions of higher schools. But they would do the same thing as a university would do, were established by people, companies, rich people, and generally that was a profit-making institutions. In 1971, the Constitutional Court decided that these schools were unconstitutional because although the name was higher school, it really did what university did, and according to law, university would be established by act of parliament. Of those schools, of course, an exception was Robert College, established in 1863, and that was quite an exception and served a great deal to our higher education. So in 1971, private higher schools, which were for profit-making institutions, they were all closed. Properties were given to government schools, and also they took the students of those private higher schools. In 1982, an amendment to our Constitution took place, here allowing non-for-profit private universities to be established. But it was not easy to do that because it also provided that these private universities, their standards of teaching and research should be no less than the standard of the geographically clustered public university. And to assure that, any institution or organization that decides to establish a private university has to do something, and that included, number one, to have a contract with a government university, a public university, saying that if within 3 years the standard of that private university in academic affairs would not be at least the level of the closest public university, then that public university that has agreed to have a contract with the private university should accept all the students of that private university, but also all properties of that private university. That wasn't an easy matter. The change in the Constitution, as I mentioned, took place in 1982, and 2 years later, Bilkent University was established by 3 foundations who got together and established Bilkent University in 1984. Bilkent University took the students, the first students 2 years later in 1986. In the meantime, I want to inform you about how students are taken to Turkish universities. By law, universities cannot directly take their undergraduate students. The system is that the candidates take a centrally organized examination, which takes place in every province, and in several places outside the country at the same time. There, according to the points they make in this examination, they will be given their first choice, second choice, and so on. We have a strict numerous clauses. Normally 1.5 to 1.8 million candidates apply for entrance into tertiary education, but about only 1/3 are taken because of the strict numerous clauses. You can take only so many students. Therefore, the candidate, after getting his or her record of how many points or marks, if you want to call it, have received, then they will apply to the universities, and the universities would take those that have higher marks according to the capacity. Therefore, it's really the merit in a way, but one exception is in arts, in music, then individual interviews are needed. During the last several years, of the top 100, applicants for higher education, of the top 100 in their marks that they've gotten, 50 of them have applied and been accepted either to Bilkent or Hacettepe. So out of 1.5 million, the top 100 have decided to go to these two institutions. Bilkent, a recently established private university, and Hacettepe, a public university. Well, these three foundations that established Bilkent happened to be the foundations that had been earlier established by our family. And these are the names. One was called Health Foundation, the other Education Foundation, and the other Science and Research Foundations. So these three foundations have established Bilkent University. It took 8 years before the second university, private university, was established in Istanbul in 1992 by Koç Foundation in Istanbul. And next one was in Ankara, almost the same year, and that was Başkent University. Following that, other universities were established. And I tell you what has happened during the past 25 years, since 1981, reform law of higher education, where Council of Higher Education was established. In 1980, population of Turkey was 45 million. Today, it is 70 million in round figures. Age group 20 to 24 in 1980 was 4 million. Today, it is 6 million. In 1980, we had 19 universities, all public. Today, we have 68 public universities and 25 private universities. In 1980, only 6.3% of the tertiary school age boys and girls were going to school. 6.3. Today, it's 32.9 almost the same number as in Western Europe. How did this happen? Increase in number of students. In 1981, we had 232,000. Today we have over 1.5 million. And we have also a new system of open university, open education, where lectures are televised, books could be purchased by the students. If we added that number, then 237,000 becomes 2.3 million. So this is how it increased. 6.3% of the tertiary school age boys and girls, and today, that was last year, because we don't have the exact number for 2005, but it's a little more than this, 32.9% of the age group. Well, you may say, the students increased. What about teaching staff? In the past, we had a very interesting system. Any graduate of a university with a doctorate couldn't be allowed to teach. They had to pass a so-called Doctrineship examination, nationally organized, and to take that examination, the candidate should have had his or her doctorate at least 5 years earlier, and then the school where he or she is applying would require that they should pass a centrally organized Doctrineship examination, and that also included a thesis. And it happened that not very many would pass those examinations. In addition to the subject, teaching subject, he or she had also to pass examination in a foreign language. Most of them nowadays, in those days, preferred English, but there were many who had also passed their examination in German or French or Russian. But it's interesting that not very many would pass that examination. I tell you what had happened to me. I finished my medical education in Istanbul, and in 1940, according to Turkish system, I was made specialist in pediatrics. That would be equivalent to doctorate. And later, I went to the United States, to hospitals which are staffed by Harvard University, Washington University, and I had teaching positions. In 1947, when I came to Turkey, I had not passed the Turkish Doctrineship examination. I applied, they said, you should have applied last month, because each year on a certain date, there's a deadline. So I waited until 48, and I applied, and I failed in Ankara. So I said, well, let me try this time apply to Istanbul, and in 49, there they graciously told me that you can teach. So in 1948, I became docent. I could teach. But the new law, I mean, 1981, let's call it the reform law, said anyone who has had doctorate or a specialty situation in areas where there are no doctorates could be allowed to be appointed to a junior teaching position. The name may be different, but could teach. So we had a large number of depots of candidates, and that's why you could see in 1981 there were only 21,000, and now the number has increased to over 84,000. And many of these young men and women have contributed to science, and their works have been referred in citation indexes. Here you see number of students and number of teaching staff are in parallel, almost. Regarding the articles published in journals indexed by the Institute of Scientific Information Citation Indexes, in 1981, the number was 386, and last year it was over 16,000. So this speaks for itself, what has happened during the past 25 years. Turkey's ranking in the world, according to a number of international publications, and here Turkey used to be 45th in the rank of countries for their research as judged by this criteria. Very fast, since from 83 to 2005, we have come to the 19th place. And my guess is within next year, perhaps Turkey will be within the first 5 at this speed. Now, how about the level of academic level in compared with certain other criteria outside Turkey? I'm sure many of you know that in the United States, before applying for a graduate program, for masters or doctorates, in addition to other criteria, they want you to pass a centrally organized so-called GRE examination, especially for engineering students. And around 35,000 3,500 such institutions take the graduates, are asked to take this examination before being accepted to graduate programs. Here you see mostly American universities, and this is reports from US News and World Report 2005 Educational Testing Services about the percentage and their standing. Here there's 700 to 800. These are just for comparison purposes. Of the top 25 universities with the highest records. We see it starts from Washington University, Harvard, and then goes up, Stanford, Princeton, and in 2005, Bilkent was number one. Değişti mi? Aynı mı?
Değişti hocam.
And this is a year earlier, 2004, again, starting with the points, the top 25, and against, for some reason, Bilkent happens to be number one. And this is, buna bakmadık mı?
2005 hocam.
Demek ki neydi?
2004'tü bu 2005.
And this for 2005, again, Bilkent gets his top position. How does it happen? Of course, we are not ahead of Princeton, Stanford, MIT, Harvard, and what have you. But the trick is that in our situation, Harvard selects their students. There's 1,000 students out of 3,000 or 4,000 applicants. But Bilkent gets the top out of 1.5 million to 1.8 million. So I think this is the main secret that gives us this privileged position. Bitti mi? In short, I think we have made quite a bit of progress during the past 25 years. And here, there is also a body attached to Council of Higher Education. This is for evaluation. And that's another body that at least twice a year goes to each university and visit the university in addition to their publication, to their records and reports. If any university, especially private university, is not the standard that's requested by law to be at least in the level of a public university, then they will be given a warning to do something in the next 1 or 2 years. And if they don't do it, then by law, that institution is closed. But so far, no such instance has happened. Well, these are highlights of what has happened during the past 20 or 25 years in Turkey. And, Sir Chairman, if there's a time for me to answer any questions, I am here. Thank you for attention.
Yes, although we are short on time, but we will give about 5 minutes for a few questions. Professor Hassan, there. Could we have the microphone, please? The mic.
Also, they say where they come from, which country.
Yes. Professor Hassan is the executive director of Third World Academy of Sciences. He comes from Sudan, and he is now his headquarters in Trieste. He worked very closely with Professor Abdus Salam, the Nobel laureate in physics, late Professor Abdus Salam, and he was appointed by him as the executive director of the Third World Academy of Sciences. Professor Hassan.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much, Professor Doctramachi, for this remarkable success story that you've told us. I just have a couple of short questions. This success story that you have for the Bilkent University, and especially when it comes to attracting the brightest students in the country to come and study there, is absolutely remarkable. And I really want to know how you manage to attract the brightest. Do you give them scholarships? Do they come because of the quality of teaching, the quality of the labs? This is something I think we have to learn from. And second, I understand the Bilkent University is a research university.
Yes.
A research university.
Yes.
So you do have quite a lot of research going on, and this is absolutely important for any university to be a research university. But is the research productivity of the university linked to some kind of production sectors or industry? And how is it related to industry? And thirdly, what about postgraduate students coming from outside Turkey? Do you have a mechanism of attracting brilliant postgraduate students from outside the country to come and study there? Thank you.
Thank you for the questions. I start with the last question, which is the easiest. It's very difficult for the candidate, for the applicant, to get the school they want. They have to show their aptitude in this centrally organized organization. The top ones get their first choices, and then decreases like that. We discovered very early that it was almost impossible for non-Turkish students to take that central examination. Therefore, what we have done, every university has set a quota for non-Turkish students, and they take a central examination competing with each other. And here, those within that quota, they could get to the universities that they would prefer. Therefore, it shows it is far easier for a non-Turkish to get into university than a Turkish student. But if a non-Turkish would like to be part of this centrally organized, there is no objection. But the chances would be very, very difficult to compete with 1.5 million. Therefore, their number will be within thousands, and within that quota, they could get far easier to higher education. Is that clear, the answer? The second, about how does it happen, attraction. Research facilities in these private universities generally is far better than the public universities. Also by law, government, it's by law, could subsidize private universities to the extent of giving about 1/2 the amount that would be given to a student in a public university. Is that understood? I mean, if you divide what the funding of a public university is and divide by number of students, you get a figure. And provided it doesn't exceed half of that, that could be given to the private university, but the criteria is again research. Plus, let me say how Bilkent makes its financing. For a research institution, of course, it's an expensive matter, but very luckily, we have a law. Any institution or any person that could donate certain amount of money to a university, whether it is public or private, that amount is taken as expense in his books. This is a big incentive. And then coming to the last point, this university was established by 3 foundations. These 3 foundations were established by our family. These 3 foundations got together and established companies. Now we have about 68 of them, and except 2, Bilkent University has 99.9% share. In two, we have 50%, and one of those is the one which is building airports in Cairo, has built 3 airports in Ankara, 2 others in Georgia, and among other things. So all prophets here come to university, and by law, no penny from a university could be transferred either by loan to the establishment that has, in other words, it cannot go, those who have established cannot make by law any personal benefit from here. This is again another provision of law. I think this has been extremely helpful in seeing that today 1/3 of our students are on full scholarship, no tuition, their boards are there, comfortable, and they get stipends monthly, and no obligation after they graduate. Those who are not on so-called scholarship, what they pay is less than half what it would cost the university their expenses. Does that answer the questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Dogromaji. I think I would like to have an applause really for a leader in really reforming the landscape and having so much effect on the landscape of higher education in Turkey. I do thank you, Professor Dogromaji, for your efforts. And always you'll be remembered by so many generations to come for your imprints on higher education in Turkey. Sorry, the time is out. Sorry, because we have another speaker, and you can have the question later during the coffee break. Microphone, please. Microphone, please.
I visited yesterday the Department of Molecular Biology and Genetics. And believe me, sir, I now live in the United States. It stands very good comparison with the Institute of Molecular Biology. And just I rang up the chairman of the department. In hours' time, a car came to fetch me from the hotel. And the professor, the chairman, he arranged for me to visit 6 of the professors. And I was so surprised, they said that whatever assistance we need, Islamic countries, they are going to offer those. So really, I take this opportunity of congratulating the president of Bilkent University for having built an institution which actually is expected to a dream. It's almost a dream to me that a Muslim university can come. And they have published in peer-reviewed journals like Journal of Molecular Virology, that kind of. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We share your views, all of us. Thank you.